Balta Acher, which is this Gemara, as you can see, because of the amount of treatment it's received and the amount of treatment it will receive, is basically the primary locus of the discussions of this mitzvah and this aseh and lo taseh of bringing korbanot at the right time, not delaying them, and so on. So that will be the continued focus today. So now, to remind you where we were up to, the Gemara yesterday said, with quoting of dealing with the Breita that says "Vayabchachet," that if you postpone bringing it, it'll be a sin for you. And the Breita said that b'chachet v'lo b'korban chachet, that your korban, it will not invalidate your korban. The Gemara did not object to this. The Gemara actually just said it was obvious. We already know this, either by a pasuk by Bechor, that if a Bechor is brought after a year, it still remains kasher. The Gemara made a distinction. Maybe the korban is kasher, but maybe it would not be miratzeh, something that's b'nei hartza'ah. Rashi and Tosafos both point out about the element of kapara, that other korbanot, like a chatos or an asham, is to be mechaper. Even an olah has certain kapara aspects. I wanted to broaden it beyond the concept of kapara, but still speak about a korban that is fundamentally brought as a means of avodah, if you would, of connecting to God, and there's an aspect of yeratzeh, of it being found favor, as opposed to a bechor, where the primary aspect is the separating of the bechor, the sanctifying of the bechor, and the bringing of a korban is really secondary. Either way, though, the importance of hartza'ah is a central idea by korbanot. So maybe, says the Gemara, that by other korbanot it would have been a problem. So, and therefore we tell you b'chachet v'lo b'korban chachet, and then the Gemara says, but even so we know it, and let's pick up with that. The Akati, top line of Vav Amud Aleph. Even with that, Mir Ben Azai Nafka, we could have learned it out from Ben Azai, this idea that it does not affect the korban. Ditani, we talked about Raita. Ben Azai Omer Oto. It says, the pasuk says by Pigul, it says Lo Yeratzeh Hamakriv Oto, the one who brings it, the Pigul, Lo Yechashev, will not be considered desire, to be fine desire for him. So Ma Talmud Lomer, why does it say it, which means like it's sort of singling out this is a problem, presumably other things are not. Lefi She'enemar, so the Breita says, it says Lo Ta'acher L'Shalamo, you should not postpone satisfying your korban obligations. Shomeani Af Me'acher Nidro Baval Yeratzeh, so even somebody who postpones his vow, it's similar to a korban of a pigul. It is not found favor. It is not accepted. Talmud Lamar Oto. No, by Pigul it says Lo Yechashev Lo Yeratzeh. Again, the issue of Ritzui Hamakriv Oto. Only it. Oto Lo Yeratzeh. Pigul is something that is not accepted with favor. It is an invalid korban. The Aim Acher Nidro Lo Yeratzeh, but it does not apply to somebody who merely postpones his vow. That is a problem for you, that you have postponed your vow, but it does not affect the acceptability of the korban. So, no problem. It's just we already know it from another drasha. Now, why the Gemara can't say that different, Tanaitic sources learn the same halacha from a different drasha is not clear. But the Gemara wants to sort of have, say that they're all teaching you something. So we don't need this pasuk of b'chachet v'lo b'chorban chachet to tell me the korban is valid. That I know already. So what do I do with that drasha? So the Gemara has to say something totally different. Ella. So here's what the drasha is. Not the sin is you and not the korban. Another point of the pasuk. B'chachet, there will be with you sin. V'lo b'ishtachachet, and it won't be your wife. It won't be held against your wife. Okay. Now, why is that? What would have been the havamina? Salgadai techamina. I might have thought. However, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, V'tema Rabbi Lazar. Since Rabbi Yochanan says, and some says Rabbi Lazar says, Ein isho shel adam mesa, a man's wife who doesn't die. Elim kain mevakim mimenu mamon ve'ein lo, unless they, from heaven, demand from him money, some monetary obligation, which he is not fulfilling. Okay. Now, what does this mean? Mevakim mimenu mamon ve'ein lo. So Tosfos quotes Rashi as saying that means that he stole money and he didn't pay it back. But Tosfos explains more in the context of what we're talking about here, that he made a vow that he's not paying up. Okay, he made a vow that he's not satisfying. They, up in heaven, God is expecting this obligation that he accepted upon himself. Mevakshi mimenu mamon. He made a pledge, and he's not satisfying it. Shnei Amar, and that, as a result of which, his wife will die. Shnei Amar, as the verse says, "In ein lecha l'shalem, lam yikach mishkavcha mitachtecha." If you don't have what to pay, then why should, meaning, don't make it happen that because you don't have what to pay up your commitments or your obligations, the thing you sleep on will be taken from underneath you, which could sort of, mean more literally, like your bed will be taken as collateral. Like, the Torah talks about a poor person, you take their night clothes and you return it and so on. But here it means your wife. Okay, so the one you sleep with. So your wife is taken away from you. If you do not satisfy your vows, your wife will die. So I might have thought, Ema b'hai avon b'al ta'acher nami ishto mesa. So if that's true about not satisfying your obligations, again, we'll read it like Tosfos, to God, not fulfilling your vows. Maybe it's true even about postponing the fulfillment of your vows. Kamash Malon, that no, it's only if you the sin focuses on you. It's not collective punishment. Not paying your vows, that's a different issue. But not postponing it, it's you and not collective. So obviously that wasn't the original Breita. The Breita said v'lo b'korbancha, but it is tying into another idea that Chazal sometimes have about how this can impact your family, and saying that would not apply in this case. It only would apply in the case of not fulfilling it altogether. Now, this is obviously a very disturbing idea. First of all, what do you mean? What about the pasuk? Lo yimsu avos sabanim ubadim lo yimsu al avos, right? Ish becheto yumasu, right? We're not supposed to believe in collective punishment. The reality is that while there are psukim that are very clear about that, about denying any sense of collective guilt or collective punishment, there are other times where we do find that there's a sense of like everybody's suffering for this, for the sin of a few, particularly around areas of avodah zarah. About wiping out the entire city. Although there again, Chazal say that you basically select out the innocent from the guilty, and you only kill the guilty and you don't kill the innocent. But nevertheless, even going back way till Pesach, right? When there's danger around, like even innocence sometimes gets swept away. Although that is different because that's sort of speaking about some, metaphysical punishment or tragedy that's occurring, as opposed to, God punishment, God punishing. On the other hand, again, specifically as opposed to, a beis din punishing, a human court punishing. But here too, we're talking about, God punishing. We're talking about divinely oriented, originated punishment. So if you think, by the way, particularly in Avodah Zarah, right at the end of Dvarim, it says, "V'nasatias panai ba'ishahu b'mishpachto." Right, so it says somebody goes ahead and gives his children over to the Molech. It says, I, God, will punish that person. Right? What does his mishpacha do? So there is sometimes in the Torah this sense, particularly around Avodah Zarah, of collective punishment. Interestingly, Ugalis there translates that word. I think that is the one place in the Torah where the Torah explicitly sort of says, I will punish him and his family, like in that way of collective. Anyway, Ugalis there translates mishpachto as his supporters. Which is interesting, because wanting to deal with the problem of collective punishment. But the point is, however much the Torah does emphasize, individual punishment, each becheto yumasu, there are still echoes, particularly around Avodah Zarah, of collective punishment. And the collective punishment, by the way, is, the most obvious one is, again, focusing on the patriarchal society. The man is the head of the household. So if there's a collective punishment, it's going to apply to the mishpachto, to his household, which is his wife and his children. And, by the way, in the case of Ir Hanidachas, so the Gemara says what you do is you identify the innocent people and they don't get killed. You only kill the guilty people in Ir Hanidachas. But Rambam says, you know what? You kill the guilty people, not meaning the guilty people, meaning the guilty men. And, anybody want to guess who else you kill? And their families. Okay? I'm trying to remember, he says wife. He definitely says children. Okay? Which is, I'm pretty positive he says wife and children. Okay? Which is like wild, right? I mean, but if you totally see the wife and children as appendages, adjuncts to the man, and the man is the primary sort of actor, then so that's like deeply obviously disturbing. I mean, the other Rishonim like are shocked that the Rambam could say such a thing, and that's even a case of like a punishment done by the court. Okay, so but the Gemara here, so we should sort of acknowledge, realize that there are still some places, in the tradition, these echoes of this sense of collective punishment, and again, at least here, sort of talking about God punishing as opposed to the court, which at least makes it, I don't know, somewhat better. And here the Gemara is trying to narrow that. It does still say that ba'avo nidarim, for the sin of violating vows, a person's children dies, which actually is that one of the things in Masechet Tuvot that are grounds for divorce. If the wife, if in a case where grounds for the way a wife will act to the husband to divorce her without the ksuva, so it's not just if she, let's say, violates halacha. It's only if she, if there's this area where she violates halacha in a way that impacts the rest of the family, or that impacts her husband. So she feeds him non-kosher food. Right? It doesn't say she's mechal Shabbos. If she's mechal Shabbos, outside of the house in a way that doesn't affect him, that's not grounds for divorce. But if she feeds him, she serves non-kosher food, that is. So one of the other case in the Mishnah is noderet ve'ena mekayemet. She makes vows and she doesn't fulfill them. Well, what does that have to do with the family? It just is between her and God. So again, in the Gemara there, it points out this exact same idea, this idea that violating vows can sort of lead to punishment of the family. So there is this idea there, particularly in the Torah around Avodah Zarah. The Gemara also quotes this pasuk and talks about it in terms of vows. And here is just limiting it to that would be an actual violation or non-fulfillment of a vow, not a postponed fulfillment, not bal ta'acher. Do you had a question?
I'm just taking in everything that you just said. I would have read this whole piece as divrei guzma. And like it's such a pun, mishkavcha. Obviously you're dead.
Yeah.
And if I do that, then I don't have to embed it in the heavy theological problematics of Avodah Zarah, etc.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, the Gemara here is distinguishing between. It says that will happen if it's real non-fulfillment. Then ein isha shel adam mesa ela im kein mevakti mimenu does not just sound like guzma. It sounds like a theological read. And I am telling you, the Mishnah in Ktuvot that talks about noderet ve'ena mekayemet really embeds that in halacha. So I know it would be nice to bracket it, but it is a theme. It is some strand that is there. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. Right. So again, that's like right. Hibadlu mitoch, but it says hein right v'chol asher lahem, which presumably also includes the families, not just the supporters. So yeah, I mean, you do get that, and that you're right. That's not about avodah zarah, but you do have it sometimes. Yeah.
What I'm hearing here is maybe something about group identification. It's about groups and how you identify with them, and maybe it's not really so much about the individual's sin or behavior, but it's about, the whole idea of Avodah Zarah is identifying your nation as a group
right.
under God, and by extension, the family is a group of sorts that you can't. That maybe you're not supposed to pick apart every individual within it. But
right. So you're saying not that the other members have guilt,
right.
but that part of what you have to do to clean the area of Avodah Zarah is to remove all the vestiges of it. So the same way, your shaber to shaber matzevotehem, etc., you have to remove all the vestiges, which include anybody that was associated. I think that is correct. I think that is, why particularly around Avodah Zarah, maybe by Korach, as was said, you don't want to leave, what that Godfather, right? Where you don't want to, don't leave anybody alive, because then the kid became the, right? the 4-year-old kid grew up to be whatever, to take revenge. Anyway, so it's not that everybody else has guilt, but that, yes, these are all connected to it, and you want to cleanse the. I think that's right. I think that's the idea of Yernidachas. Just kind of cleanse it. Chazal say by Yernidachas, you save the innocent. That's not clear in the Torah, but I do think that you're right that is the idea. But Rashi on the pasuk, Va'ishahu b'mishpachto, says why? He says because you don't have a tax collector. The tax collectors were assumed to obviously be corrupt and so on. You don't have a tax collector that the whole family isn't in on it. So Rashi there tries to frame it as presumably the family is, complicit in, and tries to deal with the issue of guilt. But I do think the pshat is not about guilt. The pshat is about more sometimes just got to clean the slate, Again, it's not the emphasis of the Torah, but it's there. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Motzas Vatecha, what comes out of your mouth, right? That's the pasuk. Motzas Vatecha tishmor v'asita, kasher natarta l'Hashem Elokecha nidava, kasher dibarta b'ficha. That's the end of the pasuk of Lo Ta'acher. It says, don't be ma'acher, do what you said. Motzas Vatecha tishmor v'asita. Okay, so now we're going to look at that. Tanu Rabbanan. Motzas Vatecha zu mitzvah taseh. Positive mitzvah, right? Okay, now, probably it's ve'asita is mitzvah taseh, but somehow exactly where motzas vatecha, where's the verb to be mitzvah taseh? But okay, that's the positive thing. Do what you said. Tishmor, right? It's motzas vatecha tishmor ve'asita. What? In order to, watch what you say. Zo mitzvah lo taseh. That's a negative commandment because tishmor, shamor is chodesh aviv. Shamor yom haShabbat lekadesho is a better example. Is a sense of do not violate. Okay, so that's a negative commandment. So there's a positive and a negative. Ve'asita, and you shall do. What is that adding? So ashara lebeitin sheya asucha. That's telling that you must do, meaning the court has to make you do, even if you don't want to do on your own volition. The court has to force you to satisfy your vows. Ka'asher nadarta, l'Hashem Elokecha nidava, ka'asher dibarta b'ficha. So as you vowed, zen neder. That's a vow, harei Allah. L'Hashem Elokecha, to Hashem your God. Elu chataot v'hashamot olot u'shlamim. So those are the things that are offered as sacrifices to God. The various different korbanot, the obligatory ones, chatas and asha, the ol and the shlamim. We discussed that yesterday. There are obligatory versions of that. There are free will versions of that. Nidava. A nidava, kamashmo, like it sounds like. So as opposed to a neder, which is harei alai, the personal obligation, nidava is harei zo, you sanctify the object. So whether it's a neder, whether it's a nidava, whether it's a free will sacrifice, whether it's an obligatory sacrifice, asher dibarta, that you spoke, what's that coming to add? Elu kache berach habayis. Habayit, these are things that are not korbanot, but things that are donations to the Beis HaMikdash. You sanctify their value, you transfer their ownership to the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, bificha, with your mouth. Zo tzedakah, that is tzedakah. Now, again, it's not exactly clear how each word means the next category, unless we just keep on adding and adding because of an extra word. But Tosfos por beficha zo tzedakah, if you look at Tosfos 3 lines down, gives a particular way it's connected. D'chsiv yatzat pi mipi tzedakah, a pasuk that explicitly connects the word pi with my mouth with the word of tzedakah. That, by the way, is a very common phrase you find in the halachic literature about the way in which Baal Ta'achir applies to tzedakah and how tzedakah becomes a neder. Beficha zot tzedakah. It's like the one phrase. Beficha zot tzedakah. So that phrase has a lot of resonance in later, and echo in later halachic literature discussing this issue of Baal Ta'achir applying to tzedakah. Now, what should be noted before we continue is that the Gemara does not have the full list it had yesterday. It's not on this list, the one that made the least sense yesterday, which was Leket Shechad Peah, right? Which is not Kodshim, it's not even something that is affected through hafla'ah, through an act of speech that transfers its identity.
Like beficha.
Beficha, which is tzedakah. But this right. So the thing that actually made no sense yesterday was Leket Shechad Peah. Besides that, it just doesn't belong on the list. Tosfos pointed out, when do you ever have Baal Ta'achir? You either left it in the field, right? Or you didn't leave it. So where's Baal Ta'achir? So, well, you didn't leave it, but now you have to go back and give it. But that really made the least sense from multiple directions, and it's not in this list. Okay, now let's see what the Gemara does with this list. So the Gemara says like this. So the Gemara says, Amarma, motzos v'tzecha zo mitzvah saseh lamali. Why do I need to learn a mitzvah saseh of satisfying your vows from this pasuk? Mi ubasa shama ve'vesem shama. Right? The pasuk that says you will come there to the place that God chooses, and you will bring there all of your sacrifices. So there's already another mitzvah that is much more explicit. They're obligated to bring your sacrifices to Yerushalayim. Okay, so the Gemara says nafka, you can learn it out. Now, of course, you could say that there's no time limit on that pasuk. That pasuk is only korbanot. It wouldn't necessarily apply to kodshei berach habayis. All right, but anyway, the Gemara says that we already have a pasuk that speaks about the mitzvah saseh to bring your korbanot. Tishmor zu mitzvahs lo taseh lamali. Now, to say the word tishmor means a negative prohibition, not to postpone it. Why do I need that? You have it more explicit in the beginning of the pasuk, right? It says, so it's explicit, lo tacher, and then it says, so the simple sense, by the way, of that whole pasuk is the motzas v'sechet yishmor v'asita is a mitzvah saseh. First it says lo ta'acher l'shalmo, then it says motzas v'sechet yishmor v'asita. But the Gemara is saying if you're interpreting this as a lo taseh, you already had your lo taseh by the first pasuk. Lo ta'acher l'shalmo, that's what bal ta'acher is. Okay, v'asita. Now let's go on with the drasha. Asara lebeistin she'asucha. The word asita says what?
When the Gemara says nafka, what does it mean?
We already learned it out from lo ta'acher l'shalmo. Yeah, we're going to have a whole list of questions. I don't understand why you're saying this pasuk is teaching me all these things. I know all these things from somewhere else. I know the mitzvahs say from ubasa shama. I know the mitzvahs lo taseh from lo ta'acher where it's explicit. And now asara lebeistin she'asucha. The idea that the Vasita tells you Basin forces you to satisfy your vows, your korban obligations. Lamali, I don't need it here. I don't need it from this. Yakrivo so nafka. You learn it from the verse that says, "He shall bring it." To Tanya, we taught it in the Brisa. Yakrivo so, right? So that's the very beginning where it speaks about what's the pasuk? At the very beginning of Vayikra. Adam ki yakriv mikem korban laHashem min abeiman min amaton yakriv es korban chaim a Pesach Oel Moed yakriv oto. He shall bring it to the opening of the Oel Moed. Okay, so what's this extra idea of yakriv? Okay, so yakriv oto. So it's already said that he brings it. So yakriv oto milamed. It teaches shekofino so ad sheyomar rotzeani. That you basically actually shekofino oto. You force him, meaning so it's meaning it not he brings his korban, but yakriv oto. You based in. Make him bring it. Yakrivo to. Make him, the person who's obligated, make him come to the Beis HaMikdash and satisfy his obligations. You force him. Yachu be'al karcho. Maybe you force him against his will. Right? It's just so funny. What else does force mean? But let's take a look. Talmud Lamar, lirt so no. It says that it has to be according to his will. Okay, son. So how do you do it? Kofino so Yomar Rotzani. You beat him up until he says, I want to do it. Okay, so that's why you make him do it, but you make him find his own desire to do it. Rambam discusses this in the context. There's a similar Gemara about forcing a husband to give a gift to his wife, where Rambam says, because deep down people want to do the right thing, and they want to do what like Beis Din wants of them and God wants of them. The Yetzer Hara gets in the way, so you beat him up until you beat the Yetzer Hara out of him, and then he's able to get to his core desire, which is of course to do it. Anyway, it's a fascinating discussion in general about forcing somebody. In the end, the person says that they're willing to do it. It comes up areas of halacha, forcing somebody into a sale. Anyway, here it basically is just telling us that Beis Din has to forces somebody to bring a korban. So therefore, why do you need this on the pasuk of Baal Ta'acher? Again, there is a difference because we're including Baal Ta'acher to be more than korbanot. We're including Baal Ta'acher to be about tzedakah, to be about perek habayis. So maybe I would not have learned the same thing, but there's a pasuk about korbanot. But the Gemara is saying that we do already know it. Now, what? Now, by the way, Tosfos points out that there are other Gemarot that make it clear that you would, in general, force somebody to do a positive mitzvah, right? The Gemara about somebody who refuses to put on tefillin or sit in a sukkah. The Gemara says, you basically force them to do it, which is fascinating. Talk about kfiyat datit. I mean, it's one thing if you owe something to the Beit HaMikdash, and you could sort of say that the Beit HaMikdash's interest, it has korbanot that are coming to it, or certainly money that's coming to it, but the Beit Din goes around, and if, we heard that you don't sit in the sukkah, we're going to beat you up until you do. But anyway, there is a Gemara like that. So Tosfos says, so why do you have to say only special by korbanot? So it says, well, I might have thought that korbanot is different because I might have thought that korbanot is something that since the Torah explicitly says lirt so no, that would be an area that we actually would be hands off. So therefore, it does tell us kofino so actually omar rotzeani. But it is interesting because there are other areas like bringing a chatas and an asham and so on, where this is about an ola, where there's actually indications that we do take more of a hands hands-off approach. Because if you think about the whole idea of a chatas and nasham, is for you to make good with God your sin, so then it's okay. That's between you and God to work that out. That's your obligation. Why does that become something in terms of our communal responsibility? So there is a Gemara, another Gemara that sort of has, and Tosfos deals with that speaks about maybe more of a hands-off approach by chatas and asham. But anyway, we do see that you force, at least by korbanot, and again, while the list of Baal Ta'achir is bigger than korbanot, the Gemara says, why do we need a special pasuk about forcing for Baal Ta'achir, if compelling for Baal Ta'achir, if we already have this from another source? Yes.
Rambam paskins that someone who doesn't give the proper amount of tzedakah gets whipped by the court.
Right. And that's part of this too,
Yeah.
because this is, if you force him, it includes everything that's on the Baal Ta'achir list.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely.
Not just the korbanot.
Right, and that's also discussions in the beginning of Baba Basra. A lot of the tzedakah sugyas, by the way, are also in Baba Basra, although tzedakah comes up here in an important way, because now you have really, very weighty mitzvot and ases and lotases associated with not satisfying, your pledges. So the Gemara continues and says, yes.
What does Tosfos mean by mamashkeninot or olot v'slamim?
Yeah, so I didn't want to get into that, but yeah, it means that the court would come and seize his property and hold it as mashko and as shorty until the person actually went ahead and brought his korban. Okay,
Yeah.
So, but that again also relates to the aspect of the monetary interest. This is not just stama mitzvah.
Right.
So on the
It's a
one hand,
kefir
right? On the one hand,
accounts.
the Beis Din has the mikdash has more, vested interest, monetary interest in this. On the other hand, you could sort of say again that this is more between a person and God, and maybe sort of not as much our something. But here we say kofino sarchi omer rotzani. So anyway, we have everything we learned from this second pasuk of the Baal Ta'achir paragraph in the Torah, we learned from other sources. Why do you need to go through the whole thing and learn out all this stuff? We already know all of this. So the Gemara says, and here becomes an important difference, the Gemara says, no, it's to tell you that there's Baal Ta'achir. There are two stages or two potential scenarios. One, a person took a vow, I will bring this korban, I have, the harei alai. Somebody said, he'll do an olah, he'll do a shlamim, or whatever. Or maybe he's even obligated. We learned yesterday, maybe maybe without a vow, maybe just the fact that you're chayiv in a chatos already, it creates a Baal Ta'achir. That's when you have the obligation, but you did not separate out the korban. Nothing is holy yet. The other scenario is afrish v'lo akriv. You sanctified the animal, and it's holy, but you haven't yet brought it to the Beis Hamikdash, or you haven't brought your car that you sanctified to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, that's scenario number 2, and there's Baal Ta'achir there as well. But tzricha, and you need to tell me that there's Baal Ta'achir in both cases. If you just had the case of taking the vow without yet separating it and telling me there's an issue of Baal Ta'achir, because you have not yet satisfied your vow. Your vow was, I will sanctify an olah, or I will give money to the Beis Hamikdash, or whatever it is, and you haven't fulfilled your vow, which is what the emphasis is, right? Kitidur neder. You took a vow, satisfy your vow. That's a problem. Aval, afish v'lo. Once you sanctify the animal, just because you haven't yet brought it as a korban, I might say, look, so wherever this animal is, it's in the temple storehouse. Okay, like I was talking about yesterday. I haven't delivered it yet, but it's already sanctified. My vow is satisfied. I just haven't done with the animal what has to be done. You need to tell me there's Baal Ta'achir there as well. Now, as I said yesterday, that certainly makes sense by a korban, where you have not yet satisfied, even if your vow, your words sanctify the animal, you have not done. The idea of that is bringing it as a sacrifice, and you haven't brought it as a sacrifice, you haven't sort of completed it. But if you sanctified your car to the Beis Hamikdash, in a way, if they actually own it right now, it's not like there's a new religious act of now delivering it. It's just picking it up. So it is a chiddush that there too, there's an idea of Baal Ta'achir after you sanctify an object just by not delivering it yet to the Beis Hamikdash.
Isn't that back to the discussion of how many chagim have to go by before you?
Yeah, so however many chagim though, that, right.
We're just back.
Yes, whatever the calendar is, however many chagim, but that's when these things would apply. Okay, so one is to tell you that it applies. I might have thought it only applies when you didn't do what your words said, when your words haven't taken effect yet. But once they took effect, just because you haven't done the second part, maybe there's not Baal Ta'achir, because it already belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. And so now I could also have said the opposite way. If you had the case just of separating it, sanctifying the animal and not bringing it as a korban, and you said that with Baal Ta'achir there, the Kamashi Legabei, because there you've got a problem. What's the problem? You have something sanctified, and you're keeping it. You're not giving it to the Beis HaMikdash or giving it as a korban. So there's Baal Ta'achir, something very concrete that doesn't belong to you, belongs to Hekdesh, and you're not taking care of delivering it. So maybe that's Baal Ta'achir. But I might have thought just saying something, taking a vow, I will bring a korban, and not yet doing anything about it. I would say it's just words. It's nothing. Now, not literally nothing. Obviously, there's this thing of a vow, but it's not enough to be over on Baal Ta'achir. Baal Ta'achir is holding this concrete object away from the Beit HaMikdash when it needs to be delivered. It's almost like a type of about lotas shok schar skir ani vevyom, like, holding somebody's wages back. You're holding back this object that belongs to the Beit HaMikdash. Maybe that would have been it. But just not yet acting on your vow, maybe that's not Baal Ta'achir. So therefore, tzricha, you need to tell me that Baal Ta'achir applies in both cases. Now, by the way, here's an interesting question, which the Gemara does not address. Let's say somebody says, I will harei alai ola, okay, and then goes through 2 regalim, and then he sanctifies the ola, okay, and then goes 2 more regalim, and then he brings it. Was he over on Baal Ta'achir? Are those different types of Baal Ta'achir, and the clock starts again? Or no, once you started with a harei alai ola, until you actually bring it, that, if you haven't brought it within 3 regalim, or are those actually, separate acts? The first is about not acting on it, so I acted on it. And the next, not translating the words into reality. And then the next is not taking the object and bringing it. So the Gemara doesn't say the clock starts again. Presumably it doesn't, but it is worth, acknowledging these 2 different sort of aspects of what's going on here. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. How could you say one of those korbanot, one of those psukim is talking about the case of only saying without separating, right? One set of psukim is that you sanctified and you haven't brought. One is that you obligated yourself, you took a neder, but you haven't yet sanctified the animal. How could you say that's one of the psukim is addressing that? By both psukim, we included the idea of a nidava. And a nidava is exactly sanctifying the animal, not taking a personal obligation. V'tnan, come in the Mishnah, ezu neder. What's the case of a neder? Ha'omer harei alai ola. It's taking a vow of a personal obligation. Ve'ezu hi nedava. What's a nedava? Ha'omer harei zo ola. Sanctifying the object, the animal. So how could you say one set of psukim is about not yet sanctifying and the other is about sanctifying? That's the neder nedava distinction. But both of the psukim are talk about neder and nedava. So how do you make that distinction? So umabe neder and nedava. I'm sorry. So we have to first quote the end of the Mishnah. What's the difference between neder and nedava? Neder, in the case of neder, meso niknav chayavach miyuso. If the animal dies or stolen, you have to still make good because your vow was you obligated yourself to bring an ola. So until that animal is brought, you have not satisfied your vow.
Or you die.
Well, yeah. Well, if you die, then no. But okay. Nidava, if it's a nidava, mesa o nignava, then if the animal dies or is stolen, by the way, notice, if it's a neder, then it's meis onignav. The neder is meis onignav. We're not dealing with the gender of the animal. We're talking about we're identifying the gender based on whether we're calling it a neder or a nedava. Anyway, so if it was a nedava and the animal died or was stolen, eino chayav bach miyuso. So you don't have to make good on it because you never accepted a personal obligation. You just sanctified the animal. So the animal died. Okay, I never obligated myself to bring it. I never had a standing obligation as an olah. I just sanctified it. As long as it's around, I have to bring it. But it doesn't. There's not a separate obligation for me to bring an animal. Fine. That's the difference of neder and nedava.
How can make refer to the neder? Nignav doesn't refer to the neder.
Yes, it does. You sanctified the animal and then it was stolen. Meso nignav is the animal. I said harei alai.
Yes, okay, fine, sorry. Yeah,
and then I separated the animal. Okay, so anyway, so the Gemara's question is, in both of the psukim, we included neder and nedava. But you're saying that the difference between the psukim is whether it's sanctified yet or not sanctified yet. Well, how could you say that? And Nidava is written in both of them, and Nidava means that the animal was sanctified. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, Amar Rava mishkachas la kegon Omer, or both, and both of them are also talking about neder. So Rabbi says mishkachas la kegon de Omer, like you said, harei alai olam manas she'eni chay b'achmiyuta. That you said, I accept an obligation of an olah on the stipulation that if something happens to it after I sanctify it, I won't have to bring another one. Okay, so that is, technically, it's a neder, but it has because it's about your personal obligation, but it has the halachic implications of a nidava in the sense that if the animal dies, you don't have to substitute it. So what he's saying is, yes, it's true that the psukim do also talk about a nidava, and we want to say that one set of psukim is only about a personal obligation, not about not talking about yet having sanctified the animal. So he says, well, okay, that case, I'll say the word nidava in that pasuk does not mean you sanctified the animal. The word nidava in that pasuk means you accepted a personal obligation with the consequences and the limits of a nidava. Okay, but at the end of the day, we're going to argue that one set of psukim is talking about taking a vow without yet translating it into something physical, and that's one aspect of Baal Ta'acher. Okay, that would classically be an idea of a neder. And the other pasuk is talking about sanctifying it and not yet bringing it, which would classically be a nidava, or a neder turned into actually making the korban. Okay, so that's so right. All these names are okay, but basically, a neder is you say harei alai, and then stage 2 is you're makdish the animal. You're makdish, right? You have an animal here that's now been sanctified. You first said harei alai, then it's sanctified. If it dies, you have to bring another one because you still have the harei alai, but you were makdish. But the animal can be sanctified, right? And then the nidava is you say just harei zo, which immediately gets you to a sanctified animal. Okay, so the Gemara says that the cases of the two psukim of Baal Ta'acher, right? One is lo ta'acher l'shalmo, right? And the other pasuk is, I wrote this well, l'shalmo, and the other pasuk is, motzas vatecha, right? So one of them, it says, is talking that the animal is sanctified and hasn't been brought. Let's say that's this case. Okay, sanctified and hasn't been brought. And the other is there's no animal yet. It's only your obligation. It hasn't translated yet into an animal. But both of the psukim say neder and nidava. So how can you have those scenarios of neder and nidava? So to have the scenario here by neder and nidava is not a problem. It started with a neder, but now you've already sanctified the animal, or it started with a nidava. So to have a case of this being a neder or nidava is no problem. Okay, but the Gemara says, how could this be a neder or a nidava? Where is the nidava element here? Neder, yes, but how could it be a nidava? Because we're saying that the animal hasn't yet been sanctified. And the Gemara says, yes, it can be a nidava because it really is a neder, but it's a neder that has some of the halachic aspects of a nidava, so you're free from responsibility. So that's why it's calling it a nidava here as well. Okay, but yes, technically here there's two types of neder. There's neder 1, which is classic, and there's neder 2, which is free from which is a quasi nidava. So in both cases, so there's no animal, right? There's no animal here. It's only that's the first case, but we can also still call it a nidava because there's some case that it's a quasi nidava without there yet being an animal.
As soon as the implications of being a neder should kick in, but the achrayut, the tanai turns it into the category of a nidava.
Right. Okay. So now the Gemara says like this. Moving on. Beficha zot tzedakah. So like this, as I said, very important in terms of Baal Ta'acher applying to tzedakah. Amar Rava utzedakah, and if that weren't enough, Rava says utzedakah mechayev alala alter. Tzedakah, you immediately transgress Baal Ta'acher. It doesn't mean like a second later, but like if you have an opportunity to give tzedakah and you're not giving it, boom. If you could just write your check and put it in the mail, every day is an opportunity. Just write the check. So you chayev la'alter. So my time, what's the reason? Because the poor people are around. So basically, Baal Ta'acher is defined as blowing the opportunity. So by a korban, you have the opportunity when you're older l'regel. But by tzedakah, you have the opportunity every day. So now, of course, the funny thing is that but we have 3 chances by a regel, right? And when you're in the Beis Hamikdash, when you are over the regel, you might, if you're there for a week, you have a week's worth of opportunities, and nevertheless, you're not over there. There's a certain degree of of tolerance, or giving you a chance that you're not over until you had 3 chances. But Rava nevertheless takes this extreme position and says you're over right away by tzedakah.
As soon as you pledge.
Well, not as soon as you pledge, then nobody would ever pledge. As soon as you had an opportunity, as what again, how exactly we would define, what does that mean? It means like I can't even first go home and watch the news before I take out my checkbook. So how far are you going to take it? The other thing, by the way, I should mention here is, what about somebody who makes a vow to give a check to a show, a donation to a show? That's not tzedakah, right? It's not exactly the Beis Hamikdash, is it? But is that's still under, is that like an extension of the idea of berek habayis, like giving to them, or or maybe not, or no, anything that's about paying up and that's related to a neder, even if it's not on this list, is included or not. Not clear whether that would fall on this or not. But anyway, by tzedakah, Rava makes this very extreme statement that you're mechayev la'alter, and the Gemara says pshita, which is amazing. So it says obvious. No, I might have thought even to be inyanit the korbanos ksiva, since it's written with the korbanos. Ad aviyal gimel regalim to korbanos. Maybe it's only 3 regalim. Kamash malan. That no hasam hu delesnu hu detalin hu rachmana regalim. There by korbanos it's about regalim. Here it's not about the regalim. Why should it be about the regalim? And the anim are present. Okay, but again, my point is fine. I get the difference. Korban, Yerushalayim, regalim, here anim, but still there you had a little bit of a few chances. Anyway, so that's the extreme statement of Rava. And I will Tosos earlier, by the way, just said. So Tosos on Dalam and Aleph by Tzedakot, Tosos just said that he says. Okay, so Tosa still wants to bring in the 3 regalim and say Rava's statement is that the aniyim are really directly in front of you. But if you're not see aniyim around, you don't have to go looking for them. That would actually still go by the 3 regalim category. Okay. Now again, what does that mean? See the aniyim? Does it literally mean walk out of the door and see the aniyim? Does it mean that again, like you can just go online and make your donation online and so on? But again, since Rav is saying quite an extreme statement about that you're over the altar, Tosos pulls back a little bit and says that's really when they're right in front of you. If they're not right in front of you, you don't have to go find them. That would still give you your 3 regalim to make good on that. Yes.
I'm surprised they don't mention the Mishnah in Peh that describes the weekly collection of tzedakah.
Yeah, but that's not about this Baal Ta'achar and about a personal neder. That's about a more communal obligation. Okay, so anyway, very, very powerful statement here about tzedakah. Okay, now the Gemara says like this. And again, to note that where is the idea about making a vow to give money to a shul or other causes that are not technically about the aniyim? Does that get put under tzedakah? Does that get put under berek habayis? Where exactly do you think that goes? Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Amar Rava, kivan shar alav regel achad over ba'aseh. That Baal Ta'acher might be 3 regalim, but the assay of like Basa Shama, the Hevesam Shama, is your first opportunity. Your first opportunity of Ola Regel, you have to bring it. So, and if not, you transgress. So there's at least an assay if you blew it even by 1 regel. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, I'll ask you on this. Hey, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Papayas. Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Papayas testified. This is in Edios, right, where they gave like lists of testimonies. So that's why you also get sometimes some names you don't see elsewhere. Of Lad Shlamim Sheyakrev Shlamim. That if a Shlamim, which could be a female, gave birth, that the animal that it gave birth to, the Kedusha sort of transfers to that, and it also has the status of a Shlamim, and it's brought as a Shlamim. Amar of Papayas, or Papayas said, shlamim. So here's somebody that's family came, he came from the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and he said, we once had a cow that was a shlamim sacrifice. V'achlenu b'Pesach, we ate the cow on Pesach. V'achlenu avlada shlamim b'chag, and we ate the child on Sukkot. So as a shlamim, so he's only saying it to point out that the child has a din of a shlamim. But the Gemara wants to know, why did you wait till Sukkot? Yeah. You had to have brought it, according to Rava, the next Chag. You had to have brought it on Shavuos. So the Gemara says, Bishlema b'Pesach loach revua. I get why you didn't bring it on one of the other days of Pesach. The Eimer de Mechusar Zman Habe. Maybe it had just been born, and it wasn't yet 8 days old.
You spent Takua, not necessarily.
No, it just gave birth. It's not you shechted it and then. You sanctified it as a shlamim, it gave birth, and then you slaughtered it, and then you brought it. Ella, Vlada b'Atzeres, heichi mashila. But how did you not bring the child by Shavuos? It was 50 days old by then, more or less. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi, you transgress an assay. So isn't this evidence you don't transgress an assay? Amar Rav Zid Nishmei to Rav, so Rav Zid said the name of Rav, no. If you're going to Shahaisa Chola be'atzeres, no, maybe the animal was sick on Shavuot, and you don't bring a sick animal as a korban. So since it couldn't be brought, that's why they were able to wait till Sukkot. Rav Ashi says, "My bachlanu vlada shlamim b'chag." What does it mean when we ate the child as a shlamim on the chag? Diktani chag hashvuos. It means the next holiday. It doesn't mean chag Sukkot. It means the next holiday. The Gemara Idach, the one who asked the question, will tell you no. Pesach, Tani Atzeret. If we're saying Pesach and then we want to refer to Shavuos, maybe if we just want to stam say Chag, who knows what we're talking about. But if we've already said Pesach and we want to talk about Shavuos, we're going to call it Atzeret. And if we say Chag, we're talking about Sukkot. Okay. So now that's number 2. By the way, you will notice that there's a series of statements of Rava here increasing the severity or the scope of Baal Ta'acher. Number 1 is, he said, by tzedakah, you're over la'alter. Number 2 is, he says, even one regel, there's an asay. Now look at number 3 that Rava's going to say. Ve'amar Rava, kiman she'aru ala gimel regalim, once you've gone 3 regalim and not satisfied your vow, b'chol yom v'yom over b'Baal Ta'acher. You get, every day is another avera. All right, so for the score keeping up in heaven, every day is another lo ta'aseh. It's not like you're done it once. Which, by the way, you sort of understand, because if you were already over in Baal Ta'acher, there's no more any consequence. Then where is the impetus to bring it now? I mean, if you never bring it, then you could. It's the Gemara before. The man's wife will die. You won't have satisfied your vow altogether. But still, there's no urgency to bring it after you're over once. So Rava says, no, actually, every single day you're over again. Meisvei says the Gemara, I'll ask you on this. Echad b'chor ve'echad akadshim kiven she'avru aleim shana below regalim below shana over b'Baal Ta'acher. Now here's a new idea we haven't seen yet, that Baal Ta'acher is not defined by 3 regalim, it's defined by the lesser of 3 regalim and a year. Now you're saying to yourself, what do you mean lesser? Of course, every year has 3 regalim in it. The Gemara will get to that in a minute, depending on how you count the year and when the regalim fall out. But anyway, the point of the Breita is either 3, not any 3, certainly not 3 regalim kisidron. Any 3 regalim or a year, whichever comes first, you're over on Baal Ta'acher. Okay, so the Gemara says, so you see you're not over on every day. So the Gemara says, the high might yufte. What's the question? That just tells you when you're first over. It doesn't tell you whether you're over every day or not. So Amar Rav Kahana, so says Rav Kahana, man kamosif shaper kamosif. No, the one that asked a question from this Breita asked a good question. Why? Mifti, let's take a look. Tana alave kamahader. The Tana is trying to see how many times you transgress, right? He's saying, not just 3 regalim, even a year, and he's trying to find more, all the time, trying to find the situations in which you will transgress. Since he's trying to identify those situations, so you should have said, and afterwards, every single day. So since he didn't say it, the author of that Breita, clearly you're only over once. So there's an obvious answer to that. The other one will say back to you, no. Tana, l'mikvi b'lave kamahader. The Tana is only trying to identify when you first transgress. Right? What is the time when it's considered to now be Baal Ta'acher? But Lava Yiteri Lokamader, he's not interested in counting up how many transgressions. He's interested in fundamentally defining the parameters of Baal Ta'acher. So we don't know yet. Rava made his statement, you're over every day. We have not contradicted it. Rava made 3 statements. We were not able to, in some cases we didn't bother to contradict it. Sometimes we didn't bother to even try to reject it. Some cases we tried, but it was pushed away. And presumably, all 3 statements of Rava stand. Tzedakah, an asay for the first regel, and a tzedakah right away, and an asay for the first regel, and every single day after you're over again every single day.
Mahadir means this is what he's interested in.
Right, he's searching around.
He's looking around at
Exactly.
this Indian and not the other.
Exactly. Okay, so now let's go back. So now we're done with Rava and those three ways of, giving even greater weight and scope to Baal Ta'acher. And now we're going to look at this back to the question of the calendar and the idea of a year, of the lesser of a year and 3 regalim. Gufa. Let's look at what we just discussed. Echad Bechor, whether you're dealing with a Bechor, Vechad Kol HaKachim, Kivan She'avru Aleim Shana Below Regalim, if it's been a year without 3 regalim below Shana, or 3 regalim without a year, over Baal Ta'acher. You transgress Baal Ta'acher. This is like this. Bishlema regalim below Shana Mishkachas La. A regalim without a full year, I get. You made the vow right before Pesach. 6 months later, Sukkot, you had 3 regalim without it being a year. Ela Shana below regalim, but a whole year without having all 3 regalim, Hechem Mishkachas La. How will you get that scenario? If you say you need Kesidron Mishkachasa, then it's easy, right? Because if you make the vow, after Pesach and before and before Sukkot, you'll have a year before going 3 regalim Kesidron. Ella, what?
Leap years?
Well, we're getting there. Okay. Ella, the man delays Kesidron. If you don't need Kesidron, any 3 regalim in order, any 3 regalim is Baal Ta'acher. Right. When will you ever have a year without 3 regalim? So the Gemara says, Rabbi. Now here's one way you could answer it. Rabbi, Nishkachas la b'shana me'uberet, a leap year. Now, okay, but the problem is by saying a leap year, say, what if it's a leap year? But if it's a leap year, then the way you would count the year would be with the leap year.
Yeah,
if I took the vow on 7 Cheshvan and it was a leap year, it's still not going to be a year until Vav Cheshvan, however many months it was. So it's not going to solve your problem. There'll still be 3 regalim. But the Gemara says we have an idea of Rebbe that in another case doesn't care about a leap year, cares about a solar year as defining a year. So if you define a year as solar year, and the situation is a leap year, then you can have 3 regalim without it yet being a year, right? You took your vow right before Pesach.
The sun hasn't come back.
Right? You took your vow right before, let's say you took your vow here. Here's your vow. Okay, let's say you took your vow on, Yud Dalet Nisan. Okay, even if it's right before Pesach. Okay, and then here, right, it could be, what would be the scenario?
Yeah, so the solar year.
No, you take it right after. You take it right after Pesach in a leap year.
Right. Take it right after. Take it right after Pesach. Okay. You take it on 1 ER. Okay. And then here you have 1 ER again. Okay. Now, if you go by, now you had 3 regalim, right? Because here was Pesach, right? Okay, whatever. Here's Pesach, right? So Shavuot, Sukkot, Pesach. So. Who cares if it's a leap year? If it's 1 ER to 1 ER, you're always going to get 3 regalim, right? But if you say, well, I don't define a year by lunar years or whatever, I define a year by 365 days. 365 days will get you over there. We'll still be before Pesach.
Yeah.
Since this was a leap year, right? Since there was an extra month here, so 365 days will now get you right before Pesach. Yes, is that clear?
Yes.
Meaning normally to get here would be 354 days, right? That's a normal Hebrew year, right? If it's a leap year, it's 384, whatever, 83. Okay, so in that case, to get you to right after Pesach will be 384, and if you go 365, you still wouldn't have had 3 regalim. Okay,
it may be tangential, but how do we get to the concept by a Veilus of good days Chodesh? As opposed to a year.
That's good.
Is that the kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I'm going to bracket that for now. Okay, let's just finish this answer. So it says, okay, so who is this Rabbi? If the house is not redeemed within a year, right, it goes over to the one who purchased it. It cannot be redeemed afterwards. We recently read this in the Torah. So what's a full year? Rabbi Omer, 365 days. In halacha, there could be an idea of a year defined by a solar year. No. No, it always goes 12 months from day to day. But if it became pregnant low, meaning to the seller, meaning that then it's 13 months. Meaning it always goes to the same calendar date, however many days it is. Normally 12 months or sometimes 13 months. So the idea by selling a house is that you have until the next year the right to buy it back. Mm-hmm. After that you lose that right. So here the Rebbe is saying you lose it right after 365 days. The Chachamim saying no, if it's a leap year, you have a few extra days. You have a full lunar year, whether it's a leap year, whether it's a normal year. So the Gemara says, according to Rebbe, I can give you a scenario where you've got a year, 365 days, and it fell before Pesach, before you had all three regalim again.
So Yemot HaChama, that Lashon means the solar calendar.
Yeah.
Solar year.
Yeah. So the Gemara says Ella, but we still have to say if you don't hold like Rebbe. So the Gemara says like this. So Mishkachsla Rebbe. So you can have it for Rebbe. The Akdisha Basar Chag HaMatzos. You sanctified right after Pesach. Techimata Shili Adar Basra. That once the end of Adar Sheni passes. So Malya. So that Basra Shana Malya. Then you've had 365 days. You sanctified it on whatever 23 Nisan. Now it's the end of Adar Sheni. That's 365 days. But regalim lo malu. You haven't yet had a Pesach. But if you always define a year by the same date in the Hebrew calendar, then how do you have a year without it being 3 regalim? So the Gemara says, let's just do the answer. Kidatani Rabbi Shmaya Atzeres Pamim Hey Pamim Shisha Pamim Shiva. Shavuos can sometimes be on the 5th of Sivan, sometimes the 6th, sometimes the 7th, because it's 50 days after the day, Pesach. So the question is, though, which day of the month? Well, that depends how big how long a Nisan is and how long a year is. Haketzad, if Nisan and Iyar are both 30-day months, Chamisha, it's on the 5th of Sivan. Shneim Cheserim, if they are both 29-day months, Shiva, it's on the 7th of Sivan. Echad Maleh, Echad Chaser, if one is full and one is lacking, Shisha, it's on the 6th of Sivan. Now, how will that answer the case? Because you took your vow on this year, the Shavuot fell out on Zion Sivan, no, on 5 Sivan. Okay, this year it fell out on 5 Sivan. This is Shavuot. Okay, and you took your vow on 6 Sivan. That was your vow. Okay, next year 6 Sivan is here, and guess when Shavuot is 7 Sivan. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it could be 1 year you took it on 6 Sivan, you get to the next 6 Sivan, and you haven't yet had another Shavuot because 1 year Shavuot was on 5 and the other year was on the 7. So it is possible now in our calendar. So it is possible to get a full year, same Hebrew date without it being 3 regalim. Okay? Yes. And I'll just give me 1 more minute to finish this point. So the Gemara says, Uman Tana de Paligale de Rav Shmaya, who argues on Rav Shmaya that the date of Shavuot can fluctuate. So, Acherim, others, meaning Rabbi Meir, the time we turn on Brisa, Acherim Omim, Ein Ben Atzeret Latzeret, Ein Ben Rosh Hashanah Rosh Hashanah, Ella Arba Yamim Bilvad. From 1 year to the next, the holidays will always shift 4 days. Why? How many days in a Hebrew year? 354. Take out the full weeks. What's the remainder? 350, the remainder is 4. So if you always have a fixed calendar with no fluctuation of whether it's a 29-day month or a 30-day month, right, then the next year's holidays will always be exactly 4 days removed from the previous year's holidays. So this idea that 5, 6, 7 allows for some years not, be having different sized months. But Acherim says, no, they're always exactly 354 days, and the shift every month is exactly fixed, and the shift will always be exactly 4 days. And if it's a leap year, it'll always be a 29-day month. So therefore, and 29 is 4 weeks plus a day, so it'll be 5 days off. But we will not change the lengths of months, and everything is totally fixed. How does he do it if you're doing it al pi v'iyah? Yeah, that I don't know. It works nicely for a fixed calendar, but
except that's not our fixed calendar.
Why wouldn't we have adopted that calendar? It's so easy.
That's not our
because there are other factors.
Yeah, that's not our fixed
calendar. Like not having 2 days of rush.
That the age is manipulated.
Yeah.
Right.
The additional Adar is always 30.